What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Where Stats Meet Instinct. I am your host, Sam, and the A's are coming off another series loss, man. They're racking these up. This is quite a few in a row. And I'm a little bit more worried about the A's team at this moment than I have been all season. And it's not the wins and losses that are necessarily the reason why. It's not even the ugly play on the field. It's just the fact that right now there's cluster injuries to the starting rotation. And that's really not something that the A's can sustain. So going into this series, we got one inning in and Luis Severino went down. Now, Luis Severino brings out a lot of reactions from people. And I understand that there's a lot of baggage attached to him. But losing Severino is one of the more significant injuries the A's could have had. And it sounds like, I don't think we have an exact timeline on it, but it sounds like he's going to be out for quite a while. Now, I took to social media after Severino got hurt, and I basically said, like, this is one of the worst injuries the A's could get. And I got some interesting comments that I kind of wanted to talk about here. I had a few people basically say, like, hey, no, it's fine. Anyone can do what Severino's doing. Now, I get the baggage attached to him, right? Everyone's going to have their own opinions on what he said and how he's acted and stuff. But generally, he doesn't get the benefit of the doubt from fans, and that's fine. But in terms of production on the field, one thing I've said since the beginning, I think my very first episode ever on here was about this. I was talking about how Severino, Springs, Civale, they really provide a floor for the rotation. And what I meant by that is their job is not to go out there and necessarily dominate games, but their job is to go out there and provide quality innings for the team, major league quality innings. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to save the bullpen. It gives some of these young starters a little bit of runway to develop more. And that eventually is going to lead to a stronger pitching staff at the end of the year. Now, the floor is basically out of this rotation right now, right? You have Civale go down, and then you have Severino go down. And say what you want about those guys, but what they were providing is major league average innings for the whole team. Both ERAs in the fours. Severino had actually, by the numbers, been really good over his last 7 starts. I think his ERA was a touch below 3. And regardless, like, Severino was one of these guys that even the outings he would get hit. Typically what would happen is he would get hit a lot in one inning, but he would still give a decent amount of length. I don't know if there was any starts this year where he went less than 5 innings. You can fact check me on that. There might have been 1 or 2. But there was a lot of starts. Like, I think about like the Giants start, which was an ugly start. He gave up 5 runs, but he also gave you 6 innings. And those innings are valuable because what they do is they save the bullpen over the course of the year. And Severino had also given some really, really high quality outings. Like, his outing against the Angels was one of the best starts an A's pitcher has had all year. And so those innings that he was providing, even though the ERA wasn't great, and it was still good, it was low 4s, but even though the ERA wasn't special, and even though he struggled at Sutter Health, and even though he really is a guy that elicits mixed reactions from A's fans, that loss is massive because right now, well, especially when you compound it with Civale. Now, Civale doesn't go as deep into games, but he was generally providing quality innings for the A's. Now you look at this A's rotation, and basically you have Jeffrey Springs as an established big league starter. You have JT Ginn, who's thrown the ball really well lately. And after that, you're going to end up with 3 completely unproven starters at the major league level, right? Gage Jump, if you guys listen to me, you know my feelings on Gage Jump. I'm high on Gage Jump, but I also don't think he's going to provide significant innings this year. I think he's a guy that's going to provide 5 innings a start, and there's going to be starts where he goes less. So he's not one of these guys that's necessarily going to alleviate the workload on the bullpen that's starting to really add up for A's pitchers. With these A's pitchers too, like, the bullpen is solid when they're not overexposed. But when they're consistently getting overexposed, you see the flaws in this bullpen. You saw it throughout this homestand, actually, both in the Mariners series and in the Yankees series. Like, what happens when this bullpen really has to provide a ton of innings? And it can get pretty ugly. So I don't think I don't think Jump is necessarily a guy who's going to alleviate that problem. I think there's a chance he develops into a really good starter for the A's this year, but I don't think it's going to be a guy that's going to give significant length, right? Then after that, we got the call up of Cade Morris. Now, Cade Morris is not going to be a guy that is going to pitch to like a sparkling ERA, in my opinion. What he reminds me of is a little bit of JT Ginn 2 years ago when JT Ginn first came up, as in his best pitches are probably a sinker and a slider. Ginn's increased in velocity a touch since he got to the big leagues, I think. He pitches more like 93 to 95 now. I think when he first came up, he was 91 to 94. Cade Morris, I think he'll be around there, maybe a touch higher. He has more pitches than Ginn when he first came up, but he's similar in that he's a sinker slider guy that is going to compete on the mound. He hopefully can rack up some innings, but you're not necessarily going to see him shut down opposing lineups consistently. I think the best hope for Cade Morris is that he kind of provides a floor for the rotation that some of these veterans that are missing were providing. I think that's the absolute best case scenario, is that he does that, meaning that he gives you 6 innings fairly often. Those 6 innings might not be the highest quality. Maybe it's 6 innings, 3 runs, but he keeps your team in the ball game. He saves the bullpen, but he's not necessarily going to go 8 shutout innings very often, right? That's kind of the pitcher I envision, is just a more of a back of the rotation innings eater, which is super valuable. Like if he's that's going to keep the A's heads above water at this point, right? The fear is that with the lack of proven big league starters, they're not going to be able to keep their heads above water, right? And that, again, like their play is one thing, right? I've talked about their play on the field. When they play poorly, there is some expectation that that's going to happen with the roster construction. So I'm not one to overreact to poor play on the field game to game, or even in bad week stretches. But the overall lack of rotation depth and the roster construction of that is significant, because that's not the type of thing you can just easily overcome, right? And then you get into the 5th starter spot, and we don't know who that's going to be yet. My guess is it's going to be Mason Barnett. He's the guy in AAA throwing the best. I was kind of hoping it would be Jack Perkins, honestly, because I just think Jack Perkins provides a little bit more upside. There's 3 quality pitches. The fastball doesn't play as well when he's starting, but in his more extended relief outings, that's some of the best he's looked all year. So I was kind of hoping it'd be Jack Perkins. It doesn't seem like it's going to be Jack Perkins based on some of those comments, but it's also not completely ruled out either. So I think it's going to be Mason Barnett. If it is Mason Barnett, this is kind of his shot. Like, this is kind of his shot. He's probably going to be in the rotation for at least several trips through. He's a guy, I think he's in his mid-20s now, either 25 or 26. Former pretty high-regarded prospect. I loved him when he was in Double-A, I think 2 years ago. He was my favorite pitching prospect in the A's organization because he had like this carrying fastball. He commanded, he competed. He's regressed a little bit since then in terms of just like his command. But you know, at the same time, like he does have the stuff to be kind of like an innings eater in the rotation if he's able to command the baseball a little bit better. So, you know, this would be his shot, right? You give him 5 to 7 starts and you hope that he is able to prove something and able to help the A's keep their heads above water. But we'll see. I'm also not overly confident that that's going to be the final result. So that kind of gets to like a deeper problem with this A's team, right? You look at the loss of Severino and Civale, and neither of them are world beaters. Like neither of them are guys that you look at and you say like, oh, this guy going down could derail the A's season. But when you kind of look at the A's pitching depth, it kind of seems like it might do that, right? And that speaks to a bigger problem with this A's organization that's existed for actually a significant amount of time now. And I was hoping it was kind of starting to get better, and maybe it is with some of these prospects coming up. But like my whole life, the A's have been a pitching first organization. Like I grew up with the big 3 in the A's organization. And even in later years, you have like Sonny Gray, but you also had these guys like AJ Griffin that would come in and give quality production. Now, some of that's being like a Coliseum merchant, like pitching in a pitcher's park. But the A's have always been able to kind of find these pitchers that would come up and have success at the major league level. And that's just really not something you've seen for this organization for an extended period of time. Now, it has been better in terms of like, I think they're scouting at pitchers and some of their pitching development at the minor league level. For the first time, you've had multiple top 100 prospects that are pitchers in the A's organization. Depending on the outlet you use, Jump, Arnold, Wei, and Lin are all in the top 100. So there is some improvements to like the scouting and development side at the minor league level. But if you just look at the A's upper minors pitching depth, you have a lot of guys that are organizational depth, but not necessarily impact guys. Like that's kind of how I view Mason Barnett at this point. I'm hoping he kind of reverts back to that guy we saw a couple years ago in the minor leagues. But there's not a lot of pitching depth in the upper minors of guys where you're like, hey, they could step into the rotation, fill in, and give you a start, or be ready to step into a full-time rotation spot, right? I think Cade Morris and Gage Jump both fit that bucket. But after that, man, there's not much there, right? And it just speaks to like the organization has not developed starting pitchers. I think Gage Jump is the only pitcher that has started games for the A's this year that was drafted by the A's and developed by the A's. JT Ginn was traded for from the Mets, but you can put that in the bucket of like good pitching development because he struggled in the minor leagues for a while when he first got to the A's organization, and now he's looking like more of a future rotation guy. But the A's, like when you talk about their issues as a team, people are going to talk about like the move to Sacramento. People are going to talk about, management and front office and some of these trades and stuff like that. The real thing that's made this A's rebuild a little bit more prolonged is the lack of ability to develop pitchers at the minor league level. They have not consistently had pitchers come up with frontline stuff, right? And the ones that have kind of shifted into different roles. The one guy I can think in the last 5 years to come up with the A's that really had legit frontline stuff before really this year and last year a little bit with Morales, because I think Morales fell into that bucket, although he's really fallen off, was Mason Miller. Like Mason Miller was a guy with legit frontline stuff that the A's developed, but then obviously he shifted to the bullpen and he's phenomenal there. But you look at just like the A's and their ability to develop like quality mid-rotation starters, it hasn't really been there. They've had guys that they've drafted or traded for that have come up and shown a little bit, and then they fall off, and then they show a little bit, and then they fall off. And some of that can be like the major league pitching coach. I know Emerson gets a lot of heat. I honestly think it's more minor league pitching development long-term. And like, if you got rid of Emerson, I'm shedding no tears about that. Like, there's nothing that I think that guy's done that I'm excited that I'm like, oh, he definitely needs to stay in the organization. So I don't want people to think I'm like saying, oh, Emerson's fine, so all these other guys fall. But just overall, like the pitching development in this organization has really struggled for a significant amount of time. And that is something that's really going to be tested right now, because right now you are having to rely on your minor league pitchers that you've developed, right? Mason Barnett was traded for, but still he's been in the A's minor league system for a long time. You have Cade Morris, who was also traded for, but he's been in the A's minor league system for a long time. And now if these guys don't pitch well, your season's over. Like it's as simple as that, because there is not a lot behind them. Jamie Arnold is probably, he needs, I would say best case, if he absolutely starts dominating from this moment on, you may see him in September. But realistically, there's a good chance you don't see him this year. Unless it's like the A's are competing late, I could see him slotting into a bullpen role late in the year, kind of like what Chris Sale did when he first came up. But in terms of a starting pitcher, like I think best case, you see him in September, and you probably don't see him at all. Wei-In Lin is a guy that I've been super high on. If you check my Twitter feed, I probably talk about him more than any A's prospect in the organization. But he's still really young. He's 20 years old. He doesn't overpower guys stuff-wise. And so he's a guy that I would want to see miss bats at the AAA level before he gets to the big league. So he's still probably a little ways away. But there's not a lot. Like Braden Nett is the guy behind them that I think has upside, but he has to prove he's healthy first. But like, man, you're at a point where it's like, all right, it's Cade Morris taking the ball 7 or 8 starts. It's Mason Barnett, similar situation. And these guys have to keep our season together or this thing's going to fall apart, right? And the issue there, obviously Severino going down sucks. Like people have their opinions on Severino, but you know, he provides major league quality innings, which is incredibly valuable to this team at this point. Same with Aaron Civale. Now, you're basically at a point where it's like, all right, you five, you're the starting pitchers because there's not much left, right? Lopez maybe comes back up, something like that. But you're basically relying on your pitching depth and you're relying on your pitching development. Hopefully the A's pitching development has done a good enough job with these guys over the last year to 2 years where they can come up and they can actually impact a major league rotation and establish themselves as quality major league starters. Because if they don't, this A's team I don't see a way where this A's team stays afloat. Because I already talked about like the bullpen getting overexposed. This bullpen, when they have to throw more than 3 or 4 innings a game, really, really starts to look bad, right? And my concern is that these new starters coming up are not going to provide them with quite enough innings, and then that's going to overexpose the bullpen, and then the bullpen's going to start to implode. And all of that combined with the defense the A's have been playing, it makes it really tough for me to believe they can stay in contention with the injuries they've had to the starting rotation, unless Morris and Barnett can take a significant step forward and establish themselves at the major league level, and Jump as well. Those 3 guys. At least 2 of those 3 guys have to establish themselves as quality big league starters during this stretch, right? I don't see a way around that. One thing I wanted to talk about as well is this team's defense has been really bad. And you saw it during the Yankees series. One, they gave up 4 unearned runs in the very first inning of game 1. You had the inning where the A's gave up 13 runs, which was honestly unbelievable. The Yankees got a lot of bloop hits that inning too, but like at the same time, they got a lot of not bloop hits that inning too. And the A's were walking guys. It was just like one of those things where everything that could go wrong was going wrong. But one thing I want to point out about this defense is not all of the bad defense shows up in errors. As in that inning that turned into the nightmare of all nightmares really could have been halved with average defense, right? Because there was that ground ball to Kurtz where Lopez doesn't cover first. I thought Kurtz might have been able to stay on his feet and make a feed to second. He decided not to do that, but Lopez isn't covering first. So just a bad job defensive lapse by Lopez there. Then there was a fly ball to center field that realistically Butler should have caught. It was up in the air for a long time. McNeil was really going after it, and it seemed like Butler kind of eased off to let McNeil really chase it down when it seemed like Butler could have caught it, and that ball dropped in right there, right? That's 2 outs that were not made for the A's, and neither of them count as errors. They both count as hits, but neither of those plays was made. And then you never know how the inning's going to play out differently if outs are made, right? You can't 1 for 1 say this would have happened if this play was made. But if the first out there, the strikeout, I believe, to Goldschmidt, was the last out of that inning instead of the first out of that inning, the Yankees only score 6 runs, and that's all they did all game. And the A's have a really good shot with how their offense was doing of coming back there, right? And then there was another fly ball late. I believe it was the last RBI single where it looked like Carlos Cortez just didn't get there on a ball he definitely should have got there too. So the A's left 3 outs on the table in that inning. And if you've been watching the A's at all, you kind of have an idea that the A's defense has not been playing well. And I think the lack of errors early in the season kind of disguised that, on top of having better defenders out there. When you had Jacob Wilson at shortstop, he was playing very good defense. When you have Denzel in center, obviously like top 5 fielder in all of baseball. And that allowed Butler to play a little bit more right field where he's actually solid rather than in center field where he's just straight up bad. And their defense was actually okay. But with the way the defense is out there right now, man, they are below average at basically every single position. The only positions I would argue they're probably average at is third base right now with Geloff. He's actually put up really good defensive metrics, and I think the eye test kind of matched that. And Soderstrom in left has been fine, right? Everywhere else, like they're average to pretty well below average. Shea metric, like eye test, I always feel like he's okay, except for his receiving. But receiving is a huge part of catching. So he is rated as a little bit below average. Kurtz, I think, is average at best, or he's in there for his bat, obviously. McNeil is average to a touch below average. Hernandez is average to a touch below average. Geloff, I think, is average with good range. Soderstrom is average. Butler in center is bad. And then Cortez is awful in right field. And Colby Thomas is on ice skates out there too, so he hasn't been good either. And so you look around the diamond and you're like, dude, this young pitching staff that is now being forced to basically say like, hey, these young guys need to take a step forward, that lacks quality innings paired with this defense is really creating like a tough situation. And this is something like, this is why I was so high on Denzel Clark. Not necessarily that I ever thought he'd be a great hitter or anything, but when he was struggling offensively earlier in the year, this is the point I kept making is like, if you take him out of there, this defense is atrocious, right? And defense doesn't matter until it does. Like people will say like, I don't care about defense. I want the bats in the lineup. And yes, until defense really starts to matter. And you've seen in this last stretch, defense really start to matter. And the A's just don't have that. And you pair that with a below average pitching staff, and that's really tough. And so directionally for the A's moving forward, I would love to see them invest more on the defensive side of the ball. It doesn't have to be these big time like signings or anything, but just your role players need to be better defenders, because I think long term this A's offense is going to hit just fine. Like you have Nick Kurtz in the lineup, who is one of the best hitters in baseball. You have guys like Soderstrom, who I think over the course of his contract is going to hit really well. You have Langoliers, you have Jacob Wilson. Like you have the offensive core in place to be good. But the defense, man, it just seems like they haven't prioritized defense at all. And the only spot that they really had a special defender was Denzel Clark. And he can't stay healthy, and he hasn't hit when he's healthy. But you would just like to see them invest in their defense, because you see some of these other teams out there, like the Cleveland Guardians, like the Milwaukee Brewers, who are coming up on the A's schedule, where they really do invest in their defense and they take their defense seriously. And that helps the pitching. And then over time, the pitching helps the defense. And it's just this cycle where run prevention starts to happen. And it's probably never going to happen in Sutter Health to it, just because of the way the park plays and how fluky things are there with the wind and stuff like that. But I would like to see the A's invest in defense a little bit more, because it feels like they've done everything they can to get bats in the lineup. And during a rebuild, I totally get that. You're just trying to find guys that are going to be future offensive pieces for you, because offense is more important than defense. But now that they're at a point where it's like, hey, you have the offensive pieces in place, I would love to see some better defenders on this team, just so that this team can be more well-balanced, right? And I think Geloff starting to hit enough again and kind of reestablish himself on the infield. Like he could be a good defender, a great defender at second. He can be a good defender at third. You have Denzel, who's still in the organization, who I'm not going to give up on at any point, just because I do think he adds that element to this team. But overall, I would really like to see this team play better defense, right? And I don't think it's going to happen this year. I think this defense is what it is. I don't think there's any quick fixes to it. But I would like to see this team play better defense over the next few years. And I think that's something you can spend money on that's not going to be overly expensive, that the A's can afford and that they can bring in, right? So that's something I would like to see. As far as the A's play, guys, you kind of heard my stance on this if you were listening to the last episode. Teams are going to go through ups and downs, right? You've seen the offense in the Yankees series kind of break out of it. And that's something I didn't expect, because the Yankees have such a good pitching staff. Like they have such a good pitching staff. Their sixth best starter is probably Rondon. Their number 5 starter is probably Will Warren, and he would be the A's best pitcher, right? Or maybe you can make an argument for Ginn, but probably the Yankees number 5 starter would be the A's best pitcher. So I was thinking basically like they're not really going to get the offense going, but they really did hit. It's just a matter of the run prevention side of things. And I just don't really know how they're going to prevent runs moving forward. I hope I'm proven wrong on that. In terms of like this team as a whole, they're going to go through ugly stretches of ugly play. I think the offense is absolutely going to pull themselves out of it, and they're going to really, really hit. It's just going to be a matter of if the pitching can hold together. And that's a big question mark for me. One move too that I wanted to point out from that 13 run inning that I kind of forgot to touch on because I was so worked up about the defensive thing, is putting Michael Kelly in there. So this is why I'm not a big fan of like defined roles in the bullpen, because games can be won or lost in the 3rd inning just as easily as they can be won or lost in the 8th inning. And it felt like they put in a guy that was up there to kind of be a mop-up guy into a situation with the bases loaded early in the game because it was early in the game. Now, at first I was super critical of that because I was like, okay, like you have other options. But going through it, you didn't have Hogan Harris. He was down that game. You didn't have Sterner. He was down that game. You didn't have Barlow. He was down that game. And Barlow and Sterner were the two guys that came to my mind instantly of like guys you would want to put in that situation because they're kind of in that tier of like the third or fourth best guys in your bullpen, but that's a guy you can put into that spot and maybe limit the damage and keep yourself in the ball game. Both of those guys were down. So it kind of left you with Kelly, Leiter, and Medina. But having said that, Kelly is definitely my last option of who I would have wanted into that game right there. I think that just because it's the third inning doesn't mean you don't put in a good reliever, right? And Leiter's pitched a lot better than Kelly. He's been pitching better of late. Medina, at least there's a chance he helps you out of it. I think the A's are very cautious with Medina and putting him into runners on situation because he is a little bit fragile and they're kind of working with their way of building his confidence. But it would have been good to see someone other than Michael Kelly. And part of that is hindsight because Michael Kelly went in there and got absolutely lit up and didn't throw strikes and didn't do anything well. And probably shouldn't have been up with the A's in the first place. I really wish it was Alvarado. And I do think that is one of the moves that's going to be made is I think Alvarado is going to come up as part of kind of this roster shuffle. The A's didn't really have a reason to announce it today. I'm actually kind of surprised they announced the Cade Morris thing as early as they did because it's an off day and they can announce that move tomorrow and whatever. But Michael Kelly, putting him in there just seemed like a situation where I don't want to say waving the white flag, but you're kind of opening yourself up to what happened, which is just a disaster inning. And to be fair, if you had put Medina, who I probably would have wanted in there, or Leiter, you're definitely running the same risk. But at least you feel like those guys are a little bit more capable of getting major league hitters out than Michael Kelly at this point. So I would have liked to see the A's put a better arm in that situation, even though it was the third inning. Now, again, part of that's hindsight. Part of that, when I looked more into the decision, it's like, okay, I can kind of see what they're getting at there because a lot of the guys I would have wanted in that situation weren't available. But that is the type of thing I want to see them do in the future is be more aggressive even early in the game because if it does get out of hand, you can always put your mop-up guys in, right? But what you can't do is put mop-up guys in, then the game's already lost. And the game's already lost, and then it's too late. There's nothing you can do at that point. If you put in a good reliever, yeah, you might be in the same situation, but then you're just in the same situation. If you put in a good reliever, there's a chance, the game's 5-3 at that point, and it unfolds a lot differently. So it was a rough series. In terms of the run prevention standpoint, I think the Severino is a much, much bigger deal than people are making it out to be. And I think that's because people have mixed feelings about Severino, but I think that's one of the worst injuries the A's could sustain. Just a starter that gives major league quality innings, especially when you compound it with losing Civale, who's basically the same thing. I think those two injuries at the same time are really going to be tough to overcome. Having said that, maybe these guys, Cade Morris, my assumption is Mason Barnett. Maybe it's Jack Perkins. Maybe it's someone else. I don't know. Whoever that other guy is, maybe they provide a little more quality than I'm expecting and, can really do some things. I do think there's a chance Cade Morris really turns into a quality major league starter. And I've said that since my first prospect episode a long time ago, just because he does have a deep arsenal. He's a competitor on the mound. He's a good athlete. All those things you kind of like. He's the type of pitcher I personally like watching pitch. But, there's obviously no guarantee of that because he hasn't pitched at the major league level at this point. But maybe he can be more of a back-end starter and keep the A's competitive, stuff like that. Looking forward to the Cubs series. The Cubs have played poorly. Recently, they went on a really hot stretch early in the year, and then they went on a really cold stretch. If you think we're riding the roller coaster with the A's this year, I promise you Cubs fans are riding the roller coaster a hell of a lot more because they looked like the best team in baseball for a stretch, and then they looked like the worst team in baseball for a stretch, and we're, like a third of the way into the year. I like the pitching matchups for the A's. The first one, Jamison Tyone. Second one, Colin Ray. These are both right-handed pitchers, and I like the A's lineup against right-handers better than the left-handers that tend to get hit. The A's have been putting together quality at-bats. Now, again, caveat, you're facing major league pitchers. Any major league pitcher can carve up any major league lineup on the right day. So it's not a guarantee that the A's are going to come out there and score a bunch of runs, but I do like those matchups for the A's. Hopefully the A's can just come out and slug a little bit, and maybe in the first game put up like 8 runs and win a game like 8-4, where Gage Jump gets his first major league win, and you just feel good about it, right? And you just feel good about it. And then you can kind of get that momentum flipped back in your favor, because then you face Colin Ray the next day, and maybe you can do something similar. And then Imanaga in game 3, he's a little bit better of a pitcher, but he is prone to the home run ball. So all of these games are winnable games. And then you got Houston. Houston's playing better, but they're just like looking in the mirror for the A's. Like, they're an offensive driven team that struggles on the mound. That's a series the A's can have some success in as well. And I think they're going to need to, because as good as I feel about these next 2 series, I feel that bad about the Brewers series coming up. I just feel like the Brewers are a team that is absolutely flawlessly designed to expose all of the A's weaknesses. So that series, I'm just going to be praying for 1 win. But hopefully they can get it back, get the momentum rolling back in their favor a little bit. If the offense heats up, they can bang with anybody, and they can really put out a good stretch of baseball. But I do think it's on the offense to start putting up a few more runs like they did in this Yankees series to really help these young starters have some margin for error. Because if these young starters don't have margin for error and they try to be too perfect, that whole thing can spiral on you really, really quickly. I think if the offense can come out and really put up some runs in these next 2 games, really allow these young starters to kind of grow into or not grow into, that's not the right word, but really allow them to settle into some ball games and not feel like they have to be perfect. I think that can be good for these young starters. Hopefully they get confident. Hopefully they can develop a little bit. But I predicted 1 of 3 from the Yankee series. That's what the A's got. Now the last time I said, hey, losing is ugly. That last game's a little bit of even an exception, right? I said, like, losing's ugly. This is what it looks like. It doesn't always look like that, though. It doesn't look like giving up 13 runs in 1 inning. So that was ugly, but I do think the A's are going to take 2 of 3 from Chicago. I think they're going to roll into Houston and take 2 of 3 as well. I think that will hopefully get the momentum rolling, where then you roll into Milwaukee and hopefully you can salvage a game. I'm even hesitant to predict 1 game against the Brewers. But then after that, the schedule lightens up. You get the Angels, you get the Rockies, you get some of those teams. And if the A's can right the ship and just these young guys can keep it together long enough where you start getting some of these starting pitchers back, maybe you make a move at some point. We'll see about that. But that's the way the A's can stay in this, right? Is just pulling yourself out of it right now in these next 2 series, surviving the Milwaukee series, then getting into probably the easiest part of your schedule that you're going to have on the year, and beating up on some of those bad teams, and just keeping your head above water long enough for some of these pitchers to return and some of these young guys to develop, and then the A's can roll from there, right? So I want to leave with that. There's a lot to be pessimistic about with this A's team moving forward, right? But there is a route to them also being successful. So I wanted to cover that as well, because I don't think the season's lost. I don't think the season's over, although there's maybe more hurdles now because of the pitching injuries. It doesn't mean good things can't happen for this A's team, right? It doesn't feel like it right now, but it's definitely possible good things can still happen for this A's team. So I'm going to wrap it up there, guys. Please like and subscribe to the channel. There's so many great shows out here putting a lot of great content out as well. I think we're really close to 500 subscribers. So if you haven't liked, haven't subscribed, subscribe for us. Get us to 500, man. Again, we're going to be here all year, through the good, through the bad, through the ugly. We're going to keep talking A's baseball with you. Thank you so much for tuning in, guys. I will leave it there. This has been another episode of Where Stats Meet Instinct. And as always, guys, go A's.